we ready to start?
Probably wait for another one minute because still people coming in.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we probably can start now, remember?
Okay.
Yep.
So, good evening, everybody. Oh, sorry. Good morning to you. I keep forgetting. It's morning where you are. It's evening here. So, I'm very happy to again do this talk. So this is the 8th talk in a series of 12 talks going through the text, which is called a 7-point mind training, which is written by Geshe Chekawa, Tibetan Lama. And the text is basically about how to cultivate positive qualities, positive states of mind, such as loving kindness towards all living beings, compassion, bodhicitta, the wish to become enlightened, to help all living beings, patience, generosity, and so forth. So these are qualities that we need to be able to progress on the path to enlightenment. That's the long-term goal of the Mahayana path. But these qualities are also very important, essential for our present life, for here and now, because we all want to be happy. And in order to have a more happy, peaceful, and positive state of mind, to have better relationships with other people, to have more resilience when encountering problems. So these qualities are essential to be able to have all of these. And then in turn, if we do have a happier mind, a more positive state of mind, then that's very helpful to have better health, to have a longer life, maybe even to be better off financially. These are things that people are generally concerned about. So we're learning how to develop these positive qualities, and it's very, very helpful to do that. So the real purpose of learning about and doing these mind training practices is to benefit others, to help others. But it is helpful to realize that we ourselves will benefit by doing these practices. So if we do these practices, it will be beneficial for us. And so if we realize that, then that will give us more enthusiasm, more energy to do them. And this is because our habitual tendency is to feel I am important. We're very concerned about I, me, myself. So we all have selfishness, self-centeredness to some extent. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says that if we're going to be selfish, then we should be wisely selfish. What he means by that is we should do the things that really do help us, really do bring us happiness and benefit. And what are those things? What are the things that will bring us greater happiness and benefit? Is being altruistic, more concerned about others and not so selfishly, self-centered, which is a very narrow, tight kind of attitude, to try to open up our mind, open up our heart more to others, care about others, and do things to benefit others. So doing that benefits others, of course, but it also benefits ourselves. It's very beneficial for ourselves. So this topic of selfishness, self-centeredness. It's often called the self-cherishing attitude, but I prefer to use the word selfishness or self-centeredness. So this topic is actually very important in the mind training teachings. It comes up again and again because having this attitude in our mind is said to be one of the main hindrances, one of the main obstacles to be able to follow the path of the Bodhisattva and reach enlightenment. So the self-centered attitude is something that needs to be recognized and then overcome. And it's sometimes even referred to as a disease. So I was thinking about that recently because nowadays with COVID-19, many people, probably most people in the world, are very concerned about this. We're afraid of getting COVID-19. And of course, it can be a really terrible disease that causes us a lot of suffering and even death. But I think that we could say that the disease of self-centeredness, selfishness, is even worse than COVID. And there are reasons for this. And I thought, no, that makes it worse. She's trying to fix the redness. It's very, very red. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, now it's a little better. Thank you. So I thought we could do a meditation to start the session tonight, to do a meditation on the self-centered attitude, the selfish attitude, just to get a more clear idea about that attitude and also how it's a problem. It's problematic. But before we go into the meditation, I would like to explain, based on His Holiness the Dalai Lama's explanation about different kinds of self-centeredness or self-centered, self-cherishing attitude. So I'm going to read some things from a book which is it's just been published recently. It's called, I don't know if you can see it, but it's called In Praise of Great Compassion, and it's volume. Oh, what volume is it? Volume 5 in a series of books that Venerable Children has been working on. It's mainly the teachings by the Dalai Lama, but there's a lot of material from other traditions as well, the Pali tradition, the Chinese tradition, and so on. It's kind of a contemporary Lam Rim. It's a new version of the Lam Rim with lots of wonderful material in it. So in this particular volume, it's all about how to cultivate bodhicitta. And so there's a section in here about the disadvantages of the self-centered attitude. And he explains different types or different levels of selfishness, self-cherishing, self-centeredness. And I think this is really, really helpful because it's usually not explained. You know, in the traditional teachings, traditional texts, they just use the term self-centered attitude, and they talk about how terrible it is and all these faults of it and so on. And I think this can sometimes lead to confusion and questions. For example, Venerable Children just mentioned this the other day in a talk. She said sometimes people ask, is it selfish if I want to meditate or do a retreat when my family wants me to be with them? So this sometimes happens to people, you know. You really want to do some meditation, you really want to go for a retreat, but your family, who are not so interested or maybe not at all interested in Dharma, they want you to do something with them, you know, go on a holiday or go out to a restaurant or just spend time with them. And then they might even accuse you of being selfish, you know, if you say, oh, but I would prefer to go to this retreat. I would prefer to go to a Dharma talk. I don't know if any of you have ever faced that experience, but it does sometimes happen. Or people just wonder themselves, is it selfish? Am I being selfish to say, no, I don't want to go with my family. I want to go to the retreat. So this is one kind of question that can sometimes come up with regard to this idea of selfishness. Another question that often comes up, because they say in the Mahayana teachings that the arhats, arhats are those who have attained nirvana, so what we sometimes call self-liberation or personal liberation. And so they attain nirvana, and then they just remain in this very peaceful, blissful state of nirvana, and do not, work to help sentient beings the way bodhisattvas do. So sometimes it's said that the arhats are selfish, and this also leads to confusion and questions, because people say, but arhats don't, they have realized selflessness, they have realized non-self. They don't have any sense of self, so how could they be selfish? Yeah. So these are some questions that often come up. Another thing that happens too is that we sometimes, we tend to identify with our self-centered attitude. Not that we do this deliberately or consciously. I think it's just maybe an unconscious thing, a habitual thing. So then when we hear, oh, the self-centered attitude is so bad, it's so terrible, then we may think, oh, that means I am bad, I am terrible. When we see ourselves being selfish, acting selfishly, or just thinking selfishly, then we may think, oh, I'm so bad, I'm so terrible, I'm so selfish, and we sort of beat ourselves up. So that is not correct. That is not the right understanding. So anyway, I think this explanation from the Dalai Lama is very, very helpful. So I'll just explain some of it and read some of it. So he says that there are actually different aspects of self-centeredness. So one is a coarse level, a coarse aspect of self-centeredness. So this is an attitude that considers oneself more important than others, and primarily seeks one's own happiness in this lifetime. So there's a feeling of, I am more important than everybody else, and I just want wealth, and I want pleasure, and I want power, and I want fame, like the 8 worldly dharmas. And we're running after those things, just, with a very selfish attitude, just concerned for ourselves. And with this attitude, we may be completely unconcerned about others, not caring about others. And we also may create a lot of non-virtuous actions, bad karma. It can lead us to kill or steal, to be dishonest in business, to lie, and so forth. And so that's a big problem, because, with that attitude, we're creating negative karma, we're creating suffering for ourselves that we'll experience in the future. And we may also create a lot of suffering for others. So that's the worst form of self-centeredness. One we really have to try to look out for and avoid. Then he says there's a somewhat less coarse form of self-centeredness. And this involves seeking a good rebirth in future lives. So with this we think, oh, I'm going to die one day, and then I'm going to take rebirth. I'm going to be reborn. And I really want to make sure that I take rebirth in a good situation and I don't go to a bad one. So in order to do that, we have to practice ethics. We have to create virtue, like the 10 non-virtues and so forth. So this isn't really bad. In fact, it's very good, because it means we're creating virtue. We're doing good deeds. However, our motivation is still kind of just about me. I want to be happy in my next life. I want to have a good situation. I don't want to suffer. So it's still kind of mainly focused on oneself, more concerned about oneself than others. So it's not bad, but it's not the best attitude to have. And then he says there's a subtle form of self-centeredness. And this involves seeking liberation for oneself alone. So this means feeling, oh, I understand that the whole of samsara is really full of problems and pain and suffering, and it's just a really bad situation. I want to get out. I want to get myself out of suffering, out of samsara. Buddha taught the way, so I'm going to follow that path. And so one practices mainly the 4 foundations of mindfulness, ethics, concentration, and so forth. So one does the various practices to attain liberation from samsara. But you're doing, and this is a good thing. This is, of course, very positive, very virtuous. But you're still just thinking about yourself, getting yourself out of samsara, and you don't have the attitude of wanting to help all other sentient beings to be free of samsara. So it's definitely not something wrong or non-virtuous. And also the Dalai Lama says it's not something to be abandoned, something like an object to be abandoned, to be gotten rid of, because it does enable certain people, those who are following the Hinayana path, the hearer path, or the solitary realizer path, to attain their goal of nirvana, liberation. And it was taught by the Buddha. And some people do follow this path and attain the goal of nirvana, and they become arhats. And all of this is wonderful. It's worthy of admiration. But from the point of view of bodhisattvas, someone who has that inclination, this kind of attitude of just wanting to attain liberation for oneself is something to be abandoned, because it is an obstacle to following the bodhisattva path to enlightenment. Okay, so he's explaining there are 3 different levels of self-centeredness, selfishness. So one is very coarse, where I only care about me and I don't care about anybody else, and we're just seeking happiness in this lifetime alone, and we may do all kinds of non-virtuous things. So that one is definitely very unhelpful, very wrong. The second one isn't so bad, because, at least we are aspiring for the future life and doing virtue in order to have a good rebirth in the next life. But it's still just thinking about me, not thinking about helping others. And then the subtlest form of self-cherishing is actually a very positive thing, because one is aspiring to attain nirvana, liberation. However, one isn't thinking in terms of helping everybody else, all other sentient beings, to be free of samsara. Just getting oneself out of samsara. Okay, so that's the subtlest form of self-centeredness. I hope that's clear. If you have any questions, you can ask afterwards. But the Dalai Lama says that usually, in the teachings on like how to develop bodhicitta, how to overcome self-centeredness, mainly they're talking about the very coarse one, the coarsest one, because that's the one that really motivates our non-virtuous actions, which are harmful to others, but also harmful to ourselves. So we do need to recognize that and to work on it, on overcoming it. Another thing the Dalai Lama talks about here is the need to distinguish the self-centered attitude, which is an obstacle, a problem, to distinguish that from seeking the well-being of the conventional self, the self that does exist. Because we talk in Buddhism about selflessness, about emptiness, about no self. And what that means is that there's no self of a certain type. For example, an inherently existing self, an I that is real, exists on its own, from its own side, independently. So that's a kind of false sense of self that we have. And well, we think we have. We think we have that kind of self, but this is actually ignorance. This is a wrong view that we have to overcome. We have to realize that that kind of self doesn't exist at all. But we do exist. There is some kind of self. which is sometimes called the conventional self, the merely labeled self, the merely labeled I. So that self does exist, and that self wants to be happy. So I'll just read what His Holiness says about this. He says, when we contemplate the faults of self-centeredness, it is important to distinguish it from seeking the well-being of the conventional self, the self that exists. The conventional self has the capacity to practice the path and will one day attain the bliss of awakening, enlightenment. Seeking the ultimate happiness of the mere I is a productive endeavor. Okay, so wanting to achieve the highest happiness of enlightenment for oneself, and not only oneself, of course, but to benefit others, but we do have to want ourselves to attain that. We have to attain that ourselves. So this is something positive. This isn't a negative thing. Okay, that's not selfish, in case somebody wonders. Isn't it selfish to want to achieve enlightenment? No, it's not. It's not selfish. It's positive. And then he says, the self-centered attitude, on the other hand, is an adventitious, ingrained thought on our mind stream. A limited attitude that pretends to look out for our welfare, but in fact constricts our open-heartedness and potential. It can be overcome. Pointing out the disadvantages of self-centeredness is not a criticism of the legitimate wish for the conventional I to be happy and free of pain. So do not get confused and blame yourself for being selfish. Okay. Okay, so wanting to achieve enlightenment for yourself and everybody else, wanting to achieve that highest happiness and peace and freedom from all suffering isn't selfish. Okay, so it's legitimate, it's valid, it's a good thing to do. Okay, rather recognize the self-centered attitude as the troublemaker that makes you create destructive karma and causes you misery in this and future lives. Aspire to free yourself from it so that you and all other sentient beings will not be adversely affected by it in the future. So I thought, let's do a meditation to help us understand this, these ideas a bit better and try to avoid some of the confusion that can happen if we don't differentiate these different aspects of selfishness and also the selfish attitude and the wish for the conventional I to be happy. So make yourselves comfortable, but try to keep your back straight if you can. Let your mind settle down. Put aside any thoughts that are not related to what we're doing here right now, doing this meditation on mind training. So let go of the past, the future, work, problems. Put all those aside for now. Just be in the present moment. Paying attention to the breath coming in and going out for a few moments helps you to settle down. Then bring into your mind your positive motivation for joining this session. If you're comfortable with the idea of becoming enlightened to help all living beings, then remind yourself of that, bring that up into your mind. If you're not so comfortable with that idea, try at least to have the wish to be helpful to others as much as you can in your life and not harmful to others. And then think that you're listening, doing this meditation and also listening to this talk in order to learn ways in which you can be more helpful to others. So now think about how you have a self, a sense of self, and our ideas about ourself can often be mistaken, exaggerated. If we think ourself is permanent, unchanging, independent of everything else, standing on its own, inherently existing. So those ideas about the self are erroneous, and we need to clear them away, but that's something that takes time. But that doesn't mean we don't exist at all. We do exist. There is an I, there is a self, there is a me. We are a sentient being made up of a body and a mind. And it's just labeled I or me or whatever your name might be. That kind of self does exist. And within our mind, there's the wish for happiness, peace, positive experiences. And there's also the wish to not experience pain, problems, suffering, bad experiences. And it's nothing wrong with feeling this way. According to Buddhism, we actually should be happy. And we shouldn't have to suffer. The Buddha knows that. The Buddha wants us to be happy, and he wants us to be free of suffering. All the teachings he gave are for that very purpose. So don't think it's wrong, don't think it's selfish to wish for happiness and freedom from suffering. We also have the ability, the potential to be free of suffering and its causes and to have the greatest peace and happiness possible. That's our Buddha nature. However, due to confusion, we get things mixed up. For example, we have a coarse, selfish attitude that sometimes comes up in our mind and takes over our mind, and we feel I am more important than others. And in order to get the happiness that I want and avoid the problems I don't want, it's okay for me to harm others, to do things that are unethical or even illegal in order to get what I want. So this kind of attitude sometimes leads people to commit acts of killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, and so on. But even if we don't do such terrible things like that, we might do other things motivated by self-centeredness. For example, we might leave a dirty coffee cup or teacup or dirty dishes in the sink, and then somebody else has to wash them for us. Or we might try to cut in front of other people in a queue without asking them if it's okay. When we see other people doing things like that, how do we feel? Do we feel admiration and respect, or do we feel angry? But we probably do the same things ourselves sometimes. If you can remember doing things like that, how do you feel afterwards? Does that kind of attitude, that kind of behavior bring you genuine happiness? Or do you feel ashamed of behaving that way? So this coarse type of self-centeredness is said to be the cause of all the suffering, all the problems in samsara, because under its influence, we do non-virtuous actions, like the 10 non-virtuous actions, which are the cause for being reborn in unfortunate situations and having a lot of suffering. And then we just keep cycling over and over and over again in samsara. And this self-centered attitude also causes us to feel unpleasant, painful feelings like guilt, regret, anxiety, and fear. It can also cause us to become obsessed about our own problems, even small ones, which we blow up and they seem to be huge. We may feel I'm the only person in the world who has problems. My problems are worse than anyone else's. And then we may drown in self-pity or get angry at and blame others for our problems. We might get into fights or conflicts, arguing over who's right and who's wrong. And in this way, we sometimes destroy relationships and hurt others such that they don't want to have anything to do with us anymore. Also, problems like depression, low self-esteem, loneliness can sometimes be traced to self-centeredness. Not always, but sometimes. Being excessively concerned about just me and not so concerned about others. And this is something we need to investigate in our mind, in our life, and see if it's true or not. But remember that the self-cherishing attitude, self-centered attitude, is just a state of mind, something that comes and goes in your mind. It's not always there. And it's not you. It's not who you are. It's just something that passes through your mind temporarily. So what we're doing is trying to identify this self-centered attitude and recognize its faults so that we see it as something harmful, something we don't want to keep in our mind, something that's not good for us, something we want to get rid of. But you are not your self-centered attitude. So don't beat yourself up if you find it's there in your mind. Instead, be kind and compassionate to yourself. And understand that the problem is this attitude in your mind, not you, not the conventional self that wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. And in fact, the best way to be kind and compassionate to yourself is to free yourself from self-centeredness, because that makes you suffer. It doesn't bring you happiness, it brings you suffering. And if you can decrease the self-centered attitude and increase altruism, caring for others, helping others, that will bring you genuine happiness, real happiness. So we can see this by bringing to mind some experience where we did something for another person. It doesn't have to be something huge, but giving some food to someone who's hungry, or a drink to someone who's thirsty, or helping someone who's lost and doesn't know where they're going, or helping someone who's having difficulty doing something they were trying to do. So remember having done an act like that, helping somebody else, and just check how you felt. How did that make you feel? So we probably can see that, yeah, we did feel good about that. We felt this is the right way to be. This is the right way to behave. The right thing to do. But don't beat yourself up for feeling happy about helping somebody else. You don't have to feel proud or arrogant about it. Just recognize that this is good for you. Behaving like this is good for you and it's good for others. And you can keep doing this more and more and more. And then you'll have more and more happiness and satisfaction. It's something good for you and it's good for others. So see if you can resolve to work on this. Try to be less self-centered and more altruistic, helping others, being concerned about others, and so on. And feel confident that you can do this. You can change yourself little by little, baby step by baby step. Okay, so you can now open your eyes. Okay, so going through the 7 points of this text, we finished the first 3. The third one was transforming adverse circumstances into the path, or sometimes it's called, or we could just say transforming problems into the path. So when we face problems or difficulties, there are ways we can actually use this experience as part of our practice, part of our path, and getting closer to enlightenment, and also just having a more positive, peaceful state of mind instead of being miserable. They're very practical methods. So now let's move on to the 4th point. And this is called the integrated practice of a single lifetime. And the line in the text related to this says, train in the 5 powers. So there are these 5 powers that we can practice during our life, or we should practice during our life if we really want to train our mind. And then there's also a way of practicing the 5 powers at the time of death, or before dying. Okay, so we'll see if we can get, so there's 2 sets of practicing the 5 powers during our life and at the time of death. So we'll start with during our life. Okay, so the first power is the power of intention or motivation. This means generating a really strong determination to practice. And there's many things to practice, but one of the most important things is watching our mind, keeping track of our mind, what's going on in our mind, using mindfulness, and paying attention to our thoughts and so on, as well as introspection. That's another mental factor. Sometimes it's called vigilance. That's watching the mind and being able to notice if there are unwholesome or afflictive thoughts and feelings like anger, attachment, selfishness, and so on. So we watch our mind and we try to look out for the troublemakers that can come up. And if we do notice any of the disturbing emotions or delusions coming up in our mind, then we need to work on that, apply antidotes, not just let our mind go with that afflictive emotion, like anger, for example, but realizing that if I let myself get angry and I act out my anger, I'm probably going to create some bad karma, negative karma, and I'll probably do something harmful to others, cause suffering to others. And this is going in the opposite direction of enlightenment. Yeah, if I really want to follow the bodhisattva path and reach enlightenment, I need to work on my anger and not just act out my anger. Okay, so with that understanding, then you do whatever you can to work on your mind and at least try not to act it out. Try not to act out your anger. Try to hold your tongue, we say, so that you don't speak angry words, say angry things, and hold your body. If you feel like hitting somebody or doing something aggressive, don't let yourself do that. Like Shantideva says, turn to stone. Just make yourself like a statue. Just stop yourself from acting out the anger or whatever the unwholesome thought is. And then when you are more calm, you're able to calm down and sit down and look at your mind and work on your mind. Then there's so many different antidotes, so many different methods you can use to fix your mind, to cool down the anger or the attachment, and even replace it with something more positive, transforming your mind. So instead of feeling angry, you feel patient, you feel compassionate, you feel at least acceptance. Okay, so this is a very important intention to have, and to keep going during our day. A long time ago, when I first started learning Buddhism in Kopan Monastery with Lama Zopa, Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe, and so on, I learned this kind of, I don't know if prayer is the right word, but just a way of starting the day, a kind of motivation for the day, which goes something like, may all my actions of body, speech, and mind be beneficial for all sentient beings. So it's like looking ahead for the day. This is how I want to be today, how I want to live today, how I want to do things. So may everything that I do be beneficial for sentient beings. May it not be harmful for anyone as much as possible. May it be a cause for my attainment of enlightenment, becoming enlightened to help all sentient beings. And may it help me to overcome my disturbing attitudes, my delusions. So something like that. So you can write your own motivation, but or use one that was composed by a teacher, and just learn that and recite it, read it or recite it first thing in the morning. And so that's really helpful to then think about, how you're going to live your life today, and then do that every morning. Make that just a habit. But then try not to forget it during the day. You can start off the day with this wonderful motivation, but then 10 o'clock, your boss yells at you, or a colleague is talking behind your back, and then you forget your motivation, and your mind gets all caught up in something unwholesome. But if that happens, then as soon as possible, just try to remind yourself, oh, this isn't what I was planning to do today. This isn't the motivation that I had. So again, renew your motivation, the one you started with in the morning. And number 2, the second power is called the white seed. White seed. This refers to having positive, beneficial thoughts and actions that leave imprints or seeds on our mind. Seeds that will bring good experiences in the future, happiness, good rebirths, but mainly enlightenment. That's like our main goal, our long-term goal, becoming enlightened. But of course, along the way to enlightenment, we need to make sure that we're always in good conditions, good situations where we can continue to meet with spiritual teachers who teach us, who show us the path, who guide us, who are there to help us follow the path, and spiritual friends who provide support while we're practicing, and all the conditions we need, enough food and shelter and so on, so that we can continue to follow the path. So the idea of seeds is just like if you have a garden, although I guess not many people in Singapore have gardens, but maybe flower pots that you can put on your balcony. So you put seeds in the ground and then take care of them, water them, and so on and so forth, then you'll get these nice things growing. Flowers, beautiful flowers, or nice herbs or vegetables, and so on. So here the idea is planting seeds in our mind, seeds that will bring beautiful things, nice things in the future, good experiences, realizations, more qualities, more compassion, more love, and eventually enlightenment. So we need to plant as many seeds as we can. Good seeds, seeds that will bring good results. So examples of things we can do: just practicing the 10 virtuous actions, refraining from the 10 non-virtues, making the determination to not kill, to not steal, and take precepts if you can. Take those precepts. I will not kill, I will not steal, and so on. So just living our life in that way, refraining from those actions. Already that's very, very virtuous. We're planting virtuous seeds in our mind. And then practice of giving, generosity, making offerings if you have an altar, or you go to the temple, making offerings to the Buddha, to the Sangha, and so on. Reciting sutras, mantras, meditating on, or just thinking about loving kindness and compassion, doing tonlen practice, helping others who are in need, and so on. So many things we can do to plant these white seeds, good seeds in our mind. And it's just good to do those as much as we can during our life. And also remember to dedicate. If you can't dedicate every single time, at least at the end of the day before going to sleep, just think, whatever merit I created today, may that be the cause for my attainment of enlightenment, so that I can help all living beings. Okay, then the third of the 5 powers is the power of remorse or regret. And so this is kind of the opposite. You know, the other one was trying to plant virtue, white seeds, good seeds in our mind. But then we do sometimes make mistakes. We do things that are non-virtuous because we don't have complete control over our mind, and we may have habits from the past to lie, to steal, to be dishonest, and so on. Or while we're practicing, we start to become more aware of our mind, then we might remember things that we did earlier in our life before we met the Dharma. When we were children, teenagers, and so on, maybe we did naughty things back then, and then we suddenly realize, oh, wow, that was really non-virtuous. That was really bad karma. So no need to worry and be afraid and anxious, because there's always the practice of purification. So this practice involves 4 steps, the 4 powers. I'll just mention them in case some of you haven't heard them. Probably most of you are very familiar, but the 4 powers, the first one is actually regret or remorse. That's where we just realize that something we did was unwise, unskillful, bad, and we feel sorry about that. We feel regret for doing that. We wish we hadn't done it. It would have been better if I hadn't done that. The second power is called reliance, and that involves taking refuge in the Buddha. Well, if you are a Buddhist and you have taken refuge, you do feel this sense of commitment to the Buddha, then you remember that. You renew your attitude of respect and devotion and wanting to follow the Buddha's guidance, you know, taking the Buddha as a guide. So you renew that. Because when we do something non-virtuous, it's like forgetting. We forgot that we took refuge. We forgot that we're trying to follow the Buddha's teachings. So we have to remind ourselves, bring ourselves back on track, on the path. And so taking refuge helps us remember what it is we're trying to do with our life, how it is we want to live our life. Also, another part of this is to generate compassion and love. Remember, something we probably already had an awareness of, that we want to be compassionate and loving and kind and non-harmful. But when we do things that are non-virtuous, it's often harmful to others. So again, we kind of went off track, forgot what it is we wanted to do. So we renew that. We renew our commitment to acting kindly and compassionately, non-harmfully to others. So that's the meaning of reliance. It's kind of, I think of it as putting yourself back on track, back on the path that you want to follow. Reminding yourself of what kind of person you want to be, what kind of behavior you want to do, what kind of thoughts you want to have. Just, you know, bringing yourself back to that. The third of the 4 powers could be called remedy. That's the usual term. And that means doing something positive, something constructive, something virtuous to sort of counteract the negative thing that you did. So we did something negative, created this bad energy, and now we do something positive to, balance things out, or, yeah, clear up that negative energy. So it said here you can do anything that's virtuous, any virtuous action, helping others, making offerings, making a donation to charity, reciting sutras, reciting mantras, reciting the names of Buddhas. Like, one common practice for purification involves visualizing 35 Buddhas, doing prostrations to them while reciting their names, and then reading a prayer or reciting a prayer of confession. So there we're thinking of the Buddhas, taking refuge in them, reciting their names, prostrating to them. So this is very virtuous thing to do, clearing up that negative energy. And there's also another common practice is Vajrasattva. The mantra of Vajrasattva, which has 100 syllables. It takes a while to learn, but that's one of the most powerful practices for purification. Visualizing Vajrasattva, confessing the non-virtues to Vajrasattva, and then reciting the mantra, imagining light purifying all your negative karma. So that's the third power, doing something positive, something virtuous. And then the last one, the fourth, is the power of resolution or promise or commitment. So there you make a promise to at least try your best to not do that action again in the future. If it's something really heavy, like really terrible thing, then you might say, I will never ever do that again. And you could probably keep such a promise. But if it's something light, something you do habitually, you probably won't be able to just stop cold like that. They say cold turkey, and never do that again. But you could make a promise for a short period of time, even like 5 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day. I will not do that action again for the next hour or for the rest of today. So try a shorter period of time during which you refrain from that action. And then you get used to not doing it, and then gradually you'll be able to not do it for longer periods of time and eventually stop altogether. But we need to have some kind of commitment to refrain from doing a negative action. Otherwise, if we do something negative, like getting angry at somebody, yelling at somebody, and then we say, oh, I'm so sorry, I do a purification practice. But then we just go and do it again the next day, the next hour. So there's no sort of commitment there to changing yourself. So we need to have some commitment to at least trying to change, trying to give up those kind of actions. So those are the 4 powers, and it said that there's nothing that can be purified if we use those 4 powers. Even murder, even the most horrendous, terrible crimes and actions can be purified if we apply the 4 powers. Not just once, we need to do them again and again. Usually we do purification every day. It's good to do it every day on a daily basis, to at least purify what we did that day before we go to bed at night. Okay, so that's the third power, power of remorse. And the fourth is the power of prayer. So bodhisattvas make lots of prayers. For example, some of you might be familiar with the King of Prayers. It's a text. It's actually from one of the sutras, the Gandavyuha Sutra. And it's the aspirations, Bodhisattva Samantabhadra, making all these aspirations, all these prayers about what he wants to do on his way to enlightenment, and then after enlightenment, all the ways in which he wants to help sentient beings and so on. So this is part of a bodhisattva's path or practice, is to make these kind of prayers. So it's good for us to make strong prayers. And it mentions specifically here making prayers that with the merit, the positive energy that we create, the virtue that we create, that we'll be able to enhance our bodhicitta, cultivate our bodhicitta more and more and more, not lose it, and generate that on behalf of all other beings as well. Because we wish, our goal in Mahayana is reaching enlightenment and helping all other beings to reach enlightenment. So for them to reach enlightenment, they also have to develop loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta, and follow the Bodhisattva's path. So this is the best prayer we can make, prayers relating to that wishing, not just wishing, but having a strong determination that we will do this. We ourselves will follow the Bodhisattva path, and praying that we will help all other beings do the same, generate bodhicitta and follow the Bodhisattva's path, and finally reach enlightenment. And the fifth power is called acquaintance or familiarity. So this means just making ourselves familiar as much as possible with bodhicitta and all the practices related to bodhicitta, such as compassion, love, tonglen, the practice of taking and giving that we talked about a few weeks ago and we did meditation on. So the way the mind works is that whatever we are most familiar with or habituated to is what will come up most easily, naturally, quickly, and frequently. That's the way the mind works. Or in neuroscience, I think they use the terminology of, I forget what it's called. Neural pathways, that's right. About, creating neural pathways. Okay, so when you have a neural pathway, then that kind of experience just happens again and again and again. So we talk about it in terms of the mind. So, for example, much of my life before I met the Dharma, I had a really critical mind, and I didn't choose to be this way. It's just the way my mind worked, probably from past lives. But I was always looking at people and having these critical thoughts, disliking what they were doing, criticizing what they were doing, finding fault, and so on. So probably thousands of times a day, I had these negative thoughts in my mind. And it still happens. It's still, but much less than before, because learning the Dharma and, studying the Dharma and meditating and doing a lot of practice as much as possible, and really trying to cultivate more positive thoughts, positive ways of looking at people and situations and so on. So now I find that kind of thought comes more naturally, more spontaneously. Still, the tendency to think critically, to see things in a negative way, but not as much as before. So this just shows the power of familiarity. If we make ourselves familiar with certain ways of thinking, feeling, doing things, then it becomes a habit. And after a while, you don't even have to make effort anymore. It just comes naturally and spontaneously. That's actually what happens with bodhisattvas. They meditate for a long time on compassion and love and generate this wish to help sentient beings. And at a certain point, it just comes naturally, spontaneously, just without making any effort. And that's the point at which they actually become a bodhisattva. That's the meaning of a bodhisattva. Someone who just has this spontaneous, natural, effortless compassion and concern for others. So we just tried our best to make ourselves familiar with bodhicitta and all the positive thoughts and attitudes, and then pretty soon it'll just come naturally to us. So those are the 5 powers that we can practice during our life. And then there's a teaching on practicing the 5 powers at the time of death. So in the text, the mind training text, the next 3 lines are related to that. They say, the 5 powers themselves are the great vehicles precept on the transference of consciousness. Cultivate these paths of practice. So you may have heard of POA. POA is a Tibetan term which means something like transfer. And yeah, so it's translated as transference of consciousness. So it's a practice that, it's actually a tantric practice. So to learn the practice and do the practice, you need to receive an empowerment and instructions from a teacher, and then you need to go into retreat. But basically the idea is to get ready for death. Get yourself ready for the moment of death, and learn how to move your mind, your consciousness from this body, because that's going to happen anyway. Our mind is going to leave this body and go somewhere else, to another life, another body. And as a practitioner, we want to make sure we go to a good place and not a bad place. We don't want to be born in hell or in a hungry ghost realm or as an animal. Poa is actually mainly to go to a pure land, such as Amitabha Pure Land, Sukhavati or Sukhavati, which is a very popular practice in Singapore, I know. Many people are practicing, doing lots of prayers and chanting and so on in order to be born in Amitabha's Pure Land. So there's other Pure Lands as well related to other Buddhas. But the practice of POA is usually related to that. So it's a way of training your mind so that at the point of death, you'll be able to send your mind out, usually out through the top of your head, and the mind or consciousness going out through the top of your head, and then going to the Pure Land. So that's the meaning of transference of consciousness. So this is quite a popular practice. People are very interested in it and do this practice. But it said that actually the best POA, the best transference of consciousness, is this one. Cultivating, training our mind to have love and compassion and bodhicitta, and then being able to have those kinds of thoughts in our mind as we are dying, to be able to die with bodhicitta, die with love, compassion for others. Now that may sound difficult, but if we train ourselves during our life, then it won't be difficult. It'll be easy, it'll be natural, because we've been training, preparing for that. So that's the meaning here. If we can practice these 5 powers during our life, then we'll be able to practice them also at the time of death. And this is the best POA, the best way to transfer our mind to a pure land, if that's where we want to go, or back to this human world if we want to come here. Once, I remember when I was in Singapore and we had a visiting Lama, and it wasn't the Lama, it was the attendant of the Lama, who was also a monk. And one day we were having a conversation just after lunch, and he was saying that in his next life, he doesn't want to go to a pure land, because in a pure land, everything's so nice, everything's so peaceful. It would be hard to develop compassion because you don't see much suffering there. Maybe that you don't see any suffering. So how could you develop compassion in a pure land? He said, I'd rather come back here to this world, because here there's so many problems, so much suffering, many opportunities to develop compassion. So I thought that's a really beautiful thing to say. But it's up to you. Maybe you think, oh, if I come back here, I'll just get angry and I'll just get unhappy and depressed. I won't be able to practice. If I go to a pure land, I'll be with Amitabha all day long and I can listen to teachings and practice there. That will be much better. So this is how some people think, but everybody has different ways of thinking. Anyway, so let's look at these 5 powers at the time of death. So they're in a little bit different order here. The first one in this series is a white seed. So the white seed is first here. I don't know why they changed the order, but because we actually have to do all of them. Okay, the power of the white seed. So at the time of death, it's good to give up your attachment to your possessions and make offerings of them, give them away. Most people make a will where they already decide who's going to get their money and whatever other property they may have. So it's good to, make sure you do that before you die. You've already given all those things away, so you don't have any more attachment to them. It's also good to give some to the, 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, your local Dharma center or temple. Give some to charity, help other people. And also take refuge in the 3 jewels. Make sure you have a strong sense of confidence, refuge in the 3 jewels, that they will be there with you as you are dying. Generate positive thoughts such as bodhicitta. So really try to make sure you have these positive thoughts in your mind, and try not to let your mind be caught up in worry, anxiety, fear, anger, thinking about people who hurt you before and being angry at them and so on. So really try to keep your mind free of negative thoughts, disturbing emotions, and make sure your thoughts are positive and pure. And remind yourself of whatever goals you had in your life, enlightenment. So if you were aspiring to reach enlightenment, remember that at the time of death, and you could make a prayer like, wherever I go, whatever happens to me, may I always be in the right conditions so that I can continue working towards my goal of enlightenment. I just want to make sure I keep going in that direction. Number 2, the power of intention. So before dying, we need to generate very strong positive intentions or resolutions, such as, I will not let my mind be taken over by disturbing emotions like anger, attachment, and so on. So that's one resolution you could make. Or making the resolution that I will not let my mind be separate from bodhicitta. I will really keep my mind strongly focused on bodhicitta. So in general, we should approach death with a positive state of mind. Trying to use the experience to create the causes for enlightenment to help all living beings. So we can die with compassion, die with bodhicitta. You use the experiences of dying with tonglen, do the tonglen practice, taking and giving, take on the suffering you're experiencing with the wish for all sentient beings to be free of their suffering. Imagine giving all your energy, your merit, your good qualities to others. Number 3, power of remorse. So it's good to do purification before death. Do some purification practices. If you have difficulty doing them on your own, ask your Dharma friends or teachers to help you, so that your mind is clean as much as possible before going away from this life to the next one. Really bring to mind whatever negativities you've done, feel regret for them, do the 4 powers, and really clean out your mind of negative actions, negative karma, disturbing emotions, and so on. Number 4, power of prayer. So you can make very strong prayers. For example, may I always meet with spiritual teachers who teach me the path to enlightenment, and may I always have the right conditions to continue doing this practice, follow this path, and so on. I really have strong, intention to continue your practice of Dharma in the next life and in all future lives until you're enlightened. And then power of familiarity. So as mentioned before, whatever we're most familiar with will be what arises most easily and naturally in your mind. So if during our life we have made ourselves familiar with thoughts of loving kindness and compassion and living ethically, being generous, patient and so on, then those are the kind of thoughts and feelings that will just arise kind of easily, naturally in our mind, even at the time of death. So again, that's why it's so important to practice as much as we can during our life, because the way we live our life, we're setting up the conditions for the way that we die, the kind of thoughts and feelings and experiences we'll have as we are dying. So we ourselves are creating that right now. I saw that with my mother. I was with my mother when she died, and she was always a very kind person and very religious, very devoted, and very caring for others, not selfish, but really taking care of her family and so on. So I saw, even at the time of death, she wasn't afraid. She was very peaceful and positive and kind and not concerned about it herself, but concerned about the people around her. So it was just such a clear illustration of how the way you live your life, the kind of person you are during your life, will be the way you are at the time of death. It's just a continuation of that way of being. And then that, in turn, creates the cause to have a fortunate rebirth, a good rebirth in the next life. Yeah, so there's lots of teachings about how to use death, how to think and practice and so on at the time of death. There's books by Lama Zopa Rinpoche and other teachers as well. So if that's something you're concerned about, interested in, there's lots of books, lots of material. And then it also says at the time of death itself, when we're actually dying, it's good if we can lie down in the way that the Buddha did when he was dying. It's called the lion posture. So this means lying on your right side, and you have your right hand on your right cheek and your ring finger. Here it says ring finger. I thought it was little finger. Anyway, blocking your right nostril. This is to stop the mind from getting caught up in afflictive emotions. And anyway, you can see statues. There's lots of statues showing the Buddha lying in that way. So it's actually good to do that when you go to sleep at night. So you're already training yourself when you go to sleep at night to lie in that posture. And then at the time of death, it's recommended to adopt that posture. Although some lamas die sitting up, sitting in meditation posture, and they're actually meditating as they die. And after they die, they can sometimes stay in a meditative state for days, even after they stopped breathing. But that's quite a high accomplishment. So if we can't do that, then we can at least do this like the Buddha. And then keep our mind in some kind of positive state. At least take refuge, think of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, Kuan Yin, whoever you feel strongest devotion to, your guru, and really feel they're there with you, helping you get through this experience. And really keep your mind as positive as possible and free of negative, disturbing thoughts. Okay, so that's just a quick covering of the 5 powers during life and at the time of death. So we have a bit of time left if anyone would like to ask a question.
Okay, for those who want to ask a question, can you please raise your hand? We have a question from Catherine. Catherine, you can unmute yourself and please turn on your video so that Venerable can see you.
Can you hear me, Venerable?
I can hear you.
Good morning, and thank you very much for your training. My question is on the lion posture. Does it matter that it is on the right side or the left side, whether you're male or female?
I've always heard for everybody, it's on the right side, lying on the right side. I don't know why. There's probably a reason. There's probably an explanation why it's on the right side, but it's the way. If you look at statues of the Buddha, you can sometimes see these statues of the Buddha, so you can see that's how he's lying on his right side. So whether we're male or female, we're supposed to try to lie like that.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Well, while waiting for other people to think of questions, I would like to go back to a question that Guat Cheng asked a few weeks ago about immeasurable joy. That it's not completely clear what that means. So, in this book I was just reading from, In Praise of Great Compassion, there's a whole chapter. The first chapter of the book is actually about the four immeasurables. And it has information from both the Pali tradition and the Mahayana tradition. So in the Pali tradition, it's mainly quoting from a text called the Visuddhimagga, or Path of Purification, by Buddha Gosha. I don't know when he lived, many centuries ago. I don't know exactly when, but it's kind of a very important text in the Theravada tradition they use for meditation. And he has a whole chapter in there about the four immeasurables. So just briefly, this third immeasurable, there it's called empathic joy, and it delights at the happiness and good fortune of others. So Buddha Gosha says, empathic joy is characterized by bringing joy. Its function is to oppose envy, and it manifests as the abandonment of jealousy and boredom. Its proximate cause is seeing beings' success. When it succeeds, it reduces jealousy and boredom. When it fails, it produces overexcitement. So if we practice this, it should bring joy over the happiness and success of others, and opposes jealousy or envy. Boredom, I don't know. I haven't figured that one out. We have to think about that one. But if we go too far, then it could become overexcitement. Like, woo, getting really excited about somebody else's success or happiness or good fortune. So we don't want to go too far and get really, really excited about that, but just kind of a calm, joyful feeling about other people's happiness and good fortune. So that's from the Pali tradition. And this is also something nice. It says, when we consciously cultivate empathic joy, we see so much goodness in the world. Instead of the world seeming bleak and filled with narrow-minded people and corrupt governments, our view will expand to see the goodness in others and the many ways in which people help each other on a daily basis. At present, the source of our empathic joy may be limited to our own personal gain and the gain of those we cherish. As our empathic joy expands, we will rejoice in the virtue and success of others. Okay, so it's taking joy in others' goodness, happiness, success, and so on. So that's the Pali tradition. And the Mahayana, not so much different. The meaning of empathic joy is wishing sentient beings to never be separated from fortunate rebirths and liberation's excellent bliss. Empathic joy rejoices at the well-being of others and wants it to arise and continue. It also rejoices in others' temporal happiness and wishes them never to be separated from whatever worldly happiness they have. So it's being happy over others' happiness and success, good fortune, and wanting them to continue having this happiness and wanting them to have better happiness, because we know in Dharma about better forms of happiness in future lives, liberation, enlightenment. So really wanting the best for everyone. Is that helpful? I can see you nodding. So okay. Okay. Any more questions?
Okay. Yeah, we have a question from Faith. Faith, you can unmute your side and turn on your video. Thanks.
Hi, Venerable. I have two questions, actually. So I'll ask the first one. I was wondering, you were saying something about how, you know, before you became Buddhist, you had certain ways of thought and it was because of past lives. But I was wondering how come it's not based on like how our parents and grandparents have, you know, raised us. A lot of times, like, we can kind of we can like find the source from like a parent or a grandparent, right? So if you could just elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think there's many different conditions, many different factors that affect our mind and what kind of thoughts we have, what kind of feelings we have. So I think definitely some of it could be our family, you know, the people, because, you know, we come into this world in this family, we spend a huge amount of time with them. So we're definitely influenced by the things they do and say and their attitudes and so on. But then if you look at families that have a number of different children, you can see that they don't all come out the same, right? Like in my family, we were Catholic growing up. I'm the only one who became a Buddhist. So how did I get that, you know? Certainly wasn't from my parents. My interest in Buddhism, my interest in, you know, this particular spiritual path was certainly not from my parents or my grandparents or anybody in, you know, in my life. So I think we each have our own certain things we bring with us into this life. Plus, on top of that, we can be influenced by our family, our school, our teachers, our society, our culture, things happening in our country historically and so on. So many, many, many different factors. But, you know, I definitely believe there's something.
Okay.
That's nice.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, the second question is when it comes to like combating like jealousy. So, you know, I like say prayers about trying to generate bodhicitta, but sometimes I do feel like a tinge of like I have jealous thoughts sometimes, and I'm not proud of it. So I do Tonglen sometimes too to combat the jealousy, but it still comes up, and I'm just wondering like what has worked for you, or I just need to keep doing it, I guess.
Well, no, I mean, they say the main antidote to jealousy is joy, feeling happy for the other person's happiness. But that's like 180 degrees opposite. So it's not so easy to do that sometimes. So some other things that can help to overcome the jealousy so that you can feel joy. First of all, just to see how painful it is. I mean, do you feel good when you have jealousy? No, it's horrible. It's really painful. So then you kind of want to get away from that state of mind and do something else. So that's really helpful, just to see this is painful. I don't like this. I want to get rid of this. So one thing that I find helpful is karma, thinking about karma, if you can believe in karma. Because karma says whatever experiences we have are the result of our karma from past lives, plus lots of other things, but it's mainly karma. So let's say there's somebody who's more intelligent than me, okay? Like they're really smart and they really get things really quickly. And I'm sitting there, trying to figure it out. So I could be jealous of that other person, but that's not going to do any good. That's not going to change things. And it's because of karma mainly. Some people just have this natural intelligence. I just read the other day about this little boy. He's just 10 years old and he's already in university. I mean, I've heard of a number. Yeah, he's just like so smart. Even when he was a toddler, walking around, he was already learning things, just super, super smart. And just whizzed through primary school, secondary school, and he's already in university. So this is karma. Buddhism says it's mainly what we did in past lives, the karma from past lives that accounts for whether we're more intelligent or not so intelligent or whatever. So it's not that, it's not like, it's something wrong with me and that's why I'm not so smart, but I just didn't create the right karma in the past. But I can start now to create the karma to be more intelligent in the future. So if somebody has something that we don't have, or they have more than we have, it's because of karma. Being jealous isn't going to help, isn't going to change anything.
Yeah.
If I start creating more virtue, more good karma, then I'm creating the causes to have this, whatever it is, intelligence or beauty or wealth. I'll be able to have that in the future. So the solution is to create karma, create causes for that in the future.
Okay. And I mean, even though this is still like a selfish intent, but the hope is that eventually it can become for others, right? But we need to reach there first, right?
You mean selfish in the sense of wanting to be more
The
intelligent?
karma for myself.
Well, but I mean, whatever, even if we want to help others, we do need certain qualities. You need to have a certain amount of intelligence to be able to help others. And you also need wealth. You don't want to be, if you're totally impoverished, how can you help others? How can you give to others?
Right.
So having aspiration for intelligence and other qualities and wealth and so on doesn't necessarily have to be selfish. Having those qualities will enable us to be more helpful to others. So we can always think, I want to have more intelligence. I want to have more of this and more of that, so I can make my life more beneficial for others. Do more for others, rather than just me, 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 me.
True. Okay.
But it depends on motivation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a question from Virginia.
Yeah. Okay. This kind of ties into what Faye was saying a little bit, but it's the same thing. Earlier you said that the subtlest form of just attaining nirvana for our own selves, isn't that like what the Hinayana path is all about? And is that an arhat thing too, like you mentioned?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. So in Buddhism, we say there are these, it's kind of two main traditions in Buddhism, Mahayana, and Tibetan Buddhism is part of Mahayana. And in Mahayana, our long-term goal, our final goal is Buddhahood, becoming a Buddha. And the reason for becoming a Buddha is so we can help all other beings be free of suffering and reach liberation and reach enlightenment. So we want to help all living beings. That's our real goal, is helping others. And then the other main tradition, in the Mahayana texts, they use the term Hinayana, but that term isn't so positive. It actually means the lesser vehicle or the lower vehicle. And so it's, nowadays we don't use that term. Instead, in the traditions that follow that path, they use the term Theravada or the tradition of the elders. So that's the kind of Buddhism that's found in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma. And so it's the, sometimes it's called fundamental vehicle. That's another term for that. Anyway, so their main goal is becoming, attaining nirvana, attaining liberation from samsara, but not thinking in terms of helping everybody else, helping all sentient beings. So their goal is not Buddhahood, but nirvana. And the term arhat is, that's the person who has attained nirvana, someone who has attained nirvana, someone who's attained liberation, and they're free of all suffering, karma, delusions, and so on. So they've attained liberation. Yeah, so what His Holiness was saying is, if you have the attitude of wanting to attain nirvana alone, you know, stopping there, not going further to Buddhahood to be able to help all living beings, that kind of attitude is the subtle form of self-centeredness, because yeah, you just don't have that altruistic, all-embracing intention of helping all living beings. So it's not something really bad or non-virtuous. It's just not the most expansive state of mind that you can have, that you could have, and you need to have if you really want to attain Buddhahood. Yeah, so wanting to become a Buddha, it's necessary to have this wish to help all other beings. Is that clear?
Okay. We will take one more last question from Sui Kim, because it's getting quite late in the US for you. Let me unmute Sui Kim.
I don't see him. Sui Kim. Okay, I see you now.
Wait. I'm trying to unmute him. Wait. Okay. Yeah. Sui Kim, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you turn on your video also?
I can see him.
Oh, you can see him. Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Venerable, I have actually two questions, quick one. First one is, does the Arahat and Buddhas actually cherish the merely labeled I? Because I heard that it's okay from what you just said, the merely labeled I, because that's the one that expires to enlightenment and all that. So I was wondering whether the Buddhas and the Arhat actually have that in their mind.
Do they have a sense of I, a merely labeled I?
Cherishing, self-cherishing of the merely labeled I.
I don't think so. Oh.
So that's to be abundant, actually, in the end.
Well, I mean, when you use the term cherish, it sounds a bit, I guess, what do you mean by cherish?
Well, I mean the yeah, like thinking of.
Definitely there's no attachment. There is, yeah, no attachment, no self-centeredness.
I see. Okay, so the cherishing of the merely labeled I is also to be abundant in the end. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you can have, I mean, I don't know. I can't say what it's like to be a Buddha or to be an Arhat. I don't have that experience, but it seems to me that you can still have a sense of a merely labeled I, because if you're a Buddha or you're Arhat, you still have aggregates. You still have a body, you still have a mind. And so you do have a sense of a being here, a self, an I, a me, who is just labeled to this body and mind. So I think you can have that sense of being a person without attachment, without cherishing, because cherishing can sometimes sound like attachment and something unhealthy. So to me, it seems unnecessary to have such an attitude of cherishing, but you would still have a sense of a self. You know, like when the Buddha was around in the world, he would say, I do this and I do that, and I did this in the past and I will do that in the future. So he still uses the term I, showing there's a sense of an I there, but I'm sure with no attachment, no self-centeredness. But I'm only
Okay.
guessing, trying to imagine.
Okay. And another quick one. When you do the Tongling practice, if you have the thought that you will not actually get the suffering that you are trying to take on, and you do it, is that really Tongling?
Well, I think it depends on each person. Like, maybe in the, you know, the beginning, someone may not have such great courage to really take on the suffering of others. So the thought that, well, it probably won't really happen, even though I'm imagining taking on the suffering of others, but I probably won't get it. So that kind of thought might give them the courage to even do the practice, not think, oh no, I can't do that practice, it's too scary. Yeah, so to just, well, to just try it out, have the courage to try it out. If you think, okay, it's not really going to happen, I'm not really going to get the suffering of others. On the other hand, they do say that, one, like the genuine practitioner, one who really does have bodhicitta and really does aspire to become enlightened, they need to be willing to take on the suffering of others. Like if it really does happen, they do say sometimes it can happen. If you have a strong karmic connection with the person that you're taking the suffering from, you might actually get that suffering. So you do have to be prepared for that. And a real practitioner, a strong, genuine, committed practitioner of Tonglen would not be afraid of that, would be willing. I mean, it's like you're a dad, right? So if you see one of your kids suffering, being sick, you might feel, I would rather have that sickness myself so that my child doesn't have to suffer. Yeah, I don't know. Some parents feel that way. They really feel that they would like to take away their child's suffering so the child doesn't have to experience it, even though they have to experience it themselves. So that kind of feeling, they say we should have that kind of feeling when doing Tonglen. But that's probably hard to do right from the beginning. So slowly, we work on our compassion and our love, and slowly, our mind can get to that point where we would feel genuinely willing to take on someone else's suffering so they don't have to have it. That's how I understand it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so we should finish here. Let's just do a dedication, mental dedication of the merit, positive energy we've created by coming together and doing meditation and listening and thinking about and discussing this topic, which is so precious. So we've created a lot of merit, and let's share this merit with others, all living beings, wishing that they will benefit from this merit, they will be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, achieve happiness and the causes of happiness, and be able to meet all the conditions they need to learn the Dharma, practice the Dharma, follow the path, especially the Bodhisattva path, and reach enlightenment. Okay, thank you so much. See you next week. Have a good day. Bye-bye.